This is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, where we're a little closer to spring today. And I hope you're having a lovely day. This is Midday with Reverend Don. And um, as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your question or comments on whatever platform you may be watching on. They'll appear here in my chat room and we can talk directly. And today is Leap Day. The 29th of February, and I thought I'd talk a little bit about that today, and maybe a little bit about calendars in general, and maybe the idea of the chaos moment that we've often talked about, and how these things all interact. So Leap Day is a special day. It occurs every 4 years, and in that, um, it is an unusual breakage of our normal year pattern. Now, when we talk about the idea of the chaos moment, firstly, the chaos moment is always the given moment. But the chaos moment is that moment when all patterns can be broken and new patterns introduced. Um, Again, in theory, you can always do this. And hello to Nikki in the chat room, and hello to Antonio in the chat room. It's good to see you both. In theory, you can always do this, but obviously certain times are more given to it than others. And sometimes days like Leap Day kind of commemorate this energy across the board. Hello to Renee in the chat room. The breaking of patterns. New Year's days are usually looked at this way. A variety of special occasions have this aspect of the breaking of your normal pattern when new patterns can be set. An ideal time for magic, an ideal time for transformation, and that is what Leap Day is. It's only one of many occasions when such a thing happens, and every moment can become one. But this day has that significance. That's what makes it special. It is not a day that normally occurs in our year. So when it does occur, it's a special circumstance. It's a breaking of the pattern. It is a chaos moment. So what I'd like to suggest for you on this Leap Day is think about those things that you want to bring into your life as new patterns, and those things you want to release of old patterns. And focus on that transition at this time. And hello to Steve in the chat room. It's good to see you, Steve. And hello to Janet in the chat room. It's good to see you, Janet. When we have this sort of event, this is what we do. When we talk about attuning ourselves to the powers of the universe, this is an example. One of the things I've seen lately that I thought I would talk about today, going across Facebook, the Book of Face, is a meme frequently talking about how much better off we'd be if we were using a lunar year with an exact number of days in every month that never changed, and what a simple calendar it would be, basically. And I usually refrain from answering when I see that meme, but we did that. We lived that way for a very long time. And depending on where you're at culturally, it may be perfectly fine. But this is how the Egyptian calendar, the ancient Egyptian calendar, got out of sync by months at a time, because there's a reason we don't use that kind of calendar, a reason we have things like leap days, and that reason is this. Everybody knows that it takes 365 days for the Earth to go around the sun, except that isn't true. It takes 365 days plus a fraction for the Earth to go around the sun, and that fraction throws off all calendars. You cannot have a perfectly ordinary calendar that accounts for that partial day. And that's how we get leap days, or in lunar calendars, often leap months. It's a way that we adjust our calendar to deal with that fraction of a day that exists in the year's rotation, in the Earth's rotation around the sun. And we can never have a simple calendar without change that does not adapt for that and remains accurate for any length of time. It will always be thrown off by that fraction of a day. This is why when you study the history of calendars, you see such complicated um, equations going into it. Because first people had to realize that there was a fraction of a day involved, which they did not originally. And then when they realized it, they had to figure out how to account for it, how to deal with it. And we have been doing leap days and leap months since antiquity. But it took until the development of the Gregorian calendar to come up with a solution that seems to remain good for hundreds and hundreds of years, and that is to have our leap year every 4 years and um, in, I believe, centenary years. This is why we do it. This is why we have it. But having said that, and getting back to my main point, this is an adjustment to the pattern of our calendar, an exception to our normal calendar, and therefore it is um, kind of a moose mass, if you will. It is its own little chaotic holiday if you choose to accept it that way. And so, again, good day to focus on breaking those patterns that hold you back and creating new ones. Now, if you're not familiar with moose mass, I just used that term. Let me give you a moment to become acquainted with it. Moose mass is, in certain traditions of Wicca, a movable sabbat. Um, I suppose we could consider it an esbat. And it is dedicated to the great moose, who is a form of the trickster god, and is usually celebrated by telling jokes and humorous events. My first encounter with this was from Amber Kay in a book that she did 30 years ago called Pagan Spoof, if I remember correctly. And I don't think she meant it particularly literally, but I have celebrated this for a long time, and people who've studied my works, I would assume, probably do too from time to time. And I place it um, on the occasion of the blue moon, but also on the occasion of leap day, or any day that fits that chaotic moment of breaking patterns. And we observe Moose Mass through humor on the premise that um, breaking a pattern is kind of a humorous event in its way. It reminds us that while order is very important to the universe, it is laid over a basically chaotic format. That element of chaos underneath everything has never gone away. And it is at that level that we can change everything. It's at that level that we practice our magic. It's at that level that this world that seems so very solid really isn't. And so on a day like today, we remind ourselves that reality is far more fluid than we normally like to credit it with. Now, if you've read my books, you'll know that I talk about that quite a bit. And also about how to receive greater understanding of this and how to work with it. Because in the end, amazing things are possible when you understand that they are possible, because reality is not as solid as it seems. Now, one of the things that I often talk about is I do not like oogie boogie metaphysics. I see them all the time. People saying, oh, it's so dangerous. Oh, um, you must be so very careful. And then they tell you must be careful of something that is really simple and doesn't need all that much concern. I talk frequently about the demon in the basement at the ghost hunting programs, who is actually merely a little poltergeist. But there are certain things in metaphysics that can actually be a little dangerous. And that's why when I wrote my books, I didn't talk about those things until we had a good basis to deal with them. In my books, you go forward in a very structured way that doesn't really take you into that water until you're ready for that water. And I think that's kind of important. It's not the way that I always talk about it, but it is in my mind. And the idea is this: that when you start working with truly advanced magic, you start to disrupt your normal perception of reality. When we work with deeper levels of manifestation, when we work with chrono magic, when we work with multidimensionality, we start to unravel the fabric of what we understand as reality. And you should not be doing that until you're very well grounded in who you are and where you are, because otherwise you could lose your place. But that isn't going to happen until you get into the deeper waters of metaphysics, until you're really working with the deeper things. Um, this is why, in certain branches of Kabbalah, they used to say that a student needed to be at least 40 years old and married with children before they were studying, because that would always keep them grounded. I don't quite agree with that, but I do think if you're going to work with things like chrono magic, it is good to be very well grounded, particularly in who you are and and where you are, so that you can always get back to it. And hello to Mary in the chat room. And Mary says, "Hello, Lord Don. Happy extra day to you." Thank you, Mary. Um, because when you realize that magic, that reality is flexible, sometimes extremely flexible, that dimensionality is an actual thing and can involve some very major changes in what you perceive as reality, that working with time magic is a real thing, you need to be very well grounded. And so, um, on the rare occasion that I do talk about the idea of dangers in metaphysics, that's the one that I talk about, the idea of losing your place in reality. And I've known a few people who claim that this had happened to them. My father was one of them. I've also seen people who don't make that claim, but I can see they've lost their place in reality. And you can tell when you meet someone who's in that position. Um, they're in a constant state of the chaotic moment, but not in the good sense. The order of reality has ceased to work for them. And my comment on that is that they were not sufficiently well grounded in themselves before they started to work with that level of practice. So I say, start with the simple things and work your way up. And by the time you get to that, you'll be ready to deal with it. It doesn't require a lot. Um, but it's part of psychic hygiene. And there's a reason that the very first thing I'm always going to tell you about is psychic hygiene. Psychic hygiene is vitally important, and it includes being well grounded, keeping your energy grounded, keeping yourself grounded, um, shielding, and basically just keeping your energy healthy. If you do that and you're clear in and you do your shadow work, you'll never have any problem, in my opinion. But not everybody teaches that. Not everybody does that. And as we look at Leap Day, and I think I would compare it to, if you were not aware that we have a 29th of February every few years, you would be very, very taken aback to discover suddenly that there was one. And losing a place in reality is kind of like that. So grounding and being centered are very important. And I will always come back to that theme. I think it's probably the most important thing to learn in metaphysics. And sadly, often not taught to people. I often talk about my early days as a psychic reader and the fact that many of the people I met during that period were completely ungrounded. Some of them had obviously lost their place in reality. And that is not to say that their experiences were not genuine. They just weren't the same experiences anyone else was having. Um, and this is not a good place to put yourself. It's much better to be well grounded and focused on where you are at, so that you can continue to work with that. One of the biggest problems of losing your place in reality is it becomes very hard to achieve or do anything because you often lose the connection between cause and effect. But then again, this may be a natural part of people's growth. But if so, it's one I'm happy to be beyond, um, and one that I don't particularly wish to go down on any time in the future. But it is, again, something I've seen. So, in practicing metaphysics, make sure that you are using good psychic hygiene. And while doing so, um, and studying a nice systemic uh, way of moving forward with orderly progression, you'll start to see that these things, the nature of the universe, is far more plastic than we like to give it credit for. That our perception of reality is far more rigid than reality really is. But you'll be grounded and prepared to understand that, to deal with that. Um, I think in certain backgrounds, they don't even talk about this idea, and when people encounter it, they don't know how to react. So I think that's part of my leap day message to you. Stay grounded and stay focused, and understand that for all the order of the universe, underneath all is still chaos. And in chaos, all things are possible. And again, this is where and how we work magic. We work it in the astral plane, where the orderliness of reality as we commonly consciously perceive it is irrelevant. But the thing is, here in this world, it's not as rigid and relevant as we think it is. And you start practicing magic and changing things in reality, which is what magic is all about, and you'll see that that it's not the rigid manifestation it appears to be. And as long as you're grounded, you know who you are, you know what you want. It's good to see that. You learn tremendously by seeing that, and you can generally greatly reshape everything around you when you see that. It's the whole idea behind magic. But if you're not prepared for it, or you're not grounded, or you haven't done your shadow work and you have internal crossed wires, this is the time that those things can be truly problematic, when you realize that the threads of reality are not nearly as tightly knotted as you thought they were. So these are some of my thoughts connecting to Leap Day. But once again, I want to encourage you to take this time to really think about what you would change in the patterns of your life. And yesterday, we were joined by Chris Copeland. We were talking about Rev Don's book of astrology. And looking at astrology for a moment, looking at palmistry for a moment, looking at all kinds of divination for a moment, how do these things correspond to one another? There are people who will tell you that divination will tell you exactly what must happen, and that there's nothing that can possibly change that. I'm not one of those people. I will tell you that divination will tell you what is most likely going to happen based on where you are, and is also a good warning if you want to change it, and that you can always change it. Sometimes your soul may insist on certain things for certain reasons, and you may not be able to change that due to your soul's own requirements. But even then, that's your choice. That's your higher self choosing not to change it. I think that pretty much everything can be changed in one way or another, um, through the practice of magic, as long as your soul is willing to accept the change. But there's a certain level where some of those changes, again, are very challenging to your understanding of the world. And hello to Carl Gustav in the chat room. And Carl Gustav says, I've been in this field for 40 years. My experience from the beginning was not to be lost in a trap of this life. Should be fun and serious at the same time. Yes, absolutely. the multidiversity in reality, that you can bring stability of different level planes described by the chakras from the bottom to the top, and the reality um, is equal impotent. I'm not entirely sure of everything that's meant to say, but as I understand it, yes, I agree. We life should be serious and fun at the same time. And I think that understanding the nature of reality, understanding the nature of multidimensionality, certainly goes down best with a little bit of humor. And the realization that you can affect everything around you, the realization that, well, that all these things we talk about do work. Um, and Carl Gustav says the dynamic of life is important. Absolutely. I totally agree. Um, we're not here, in my opinion, to work our way through life. Um, life certainly involves a lot of work. Um, and work is simply applying ourselves to those things that need to be done. But we're also here to have fun. We're here to enjoy. We're here to learn. And how do people most learn? Um, people learn best by playing. They learn best by experimenting in fun and challenging ways. And for the most part, I really think that's the attitude we should bring to metaphysics. That it's there to enrich our lives, and it is a playful experience with the universe when you allow it to be. So that would be my comment on that. And yes, there's always a balance. There are always things that need to be done. But years ago, I found myself in a situation where I was just totally tired out. I felt like I was one thing coming after another constantly, and I spoke to my guides and the spirit and said, why can't we slow this down? Can we make this a little more gradual? And the answer I got was, well, you're the one setting the pace. And I listened to that, and I changed my manifestation. I changed my desire for things to come a little more slowly, and not quite as constant. And I found that that's exactly what I got. I got a more relaxed pattern that I was better able to deal with. And I realized after that experience that yes, I had set myself to deal with everything as quickly as I could, and to make the fastest progress I could make, and hadn't really been conscious of it entirely, even though I was on one level very conscious of it. So even the pace at which things come to you in your metaphysical studies, in your daily life, if you talk to the universe and if you talk to your higher self, you can affect that. You can affect all of it. And the extent to which you can affect it is also the extent to which you need to be grounded before you try to do so. Because you can affect it at levels that can be very disruptive to your perception of reality if you're not ready for it. So that's my little talk about moving too fast. Um, and having said that, moving toward that is, I think, a constant purpose of our metaphysical studies, to learn to make that level of change in our experience of reality. But we, again, want to be grounded before we do it, or we may find ourselves in a position where we're merely reacting to things that um, might seem to be chaotic. And if you live in any major metropolis, you have seen people on the streets who seem to kind of be in that level. Um, and I think it's very important for us always to maintain our grounding. So one of the things you'll always hear from me, one of the things that is distinct about Correllian teachings and my personal teachings, is always that focus on grounding, that focus on being very clear in who you are, very clear in your energy, very grounded and centered in your energy. And I will always come back and focus on that. But once again, today is Leap Day, and we won't see another one for several years. So take this time again to refocus on things that you wish to see in the patterns of your life. I'm going to ask you to join me for just a brief little meditation on this subject. I'm going to suggest you take a nice comfortable position and close your eyes if you're in a position to do so. And become aware of your heart chakra and imagine it as a ball of beautiful white light within your chest, shining out like a beautiful, beautiful white sun, shining in all directions. And think about those patterns that you wish to release in this chaos moment. Think of them and see them there in your heart chakra very clearly. See them in your heart chakra and think about all the things that they have caused in your life that you also wish to release. Let us attune ourselves to the chaos moment that this day represents, realizing that all barriers to manifestation are illusion. And imagine those things you wish to release, leaving your heart chakra. Pull them into your hands and see them before you. And imagine them there in your hands. And behold, there is one power in the universe, and we are all of us perfect manifestations of that power. And as such, we will that these patterns, which have served their purpose in our life, are now released. We release them and send them away. By our will it, we draw it to us. We see the pattern and we align it. We manifest it. And see those patterns leave your life now. We want to say hello to Yazo Nix in the chat room. It's good to see you. Now, once again, become aware of your heart chakra. And in your heart chakra, see the new patterns you want to form. See them as clearly and strongly as you can. And once again, focus on this chaos moment that this day represents, when all things are possible, and draw those patterns into your life. And behold, there is one power in the universe, and we are all of us perfect manifestations of that pattern. And as such, we will these patterns into our lives, these positive patterns we desire. We will it, we draw them to us. We see them take shape. We accept it, we receive it, and we give thanks for it. So mote it be. And it is so. And allow this to take its form in your life and see the changes that it makes. And just a little word about that incantation. It's my favorite incantation. I learned it a very long time ago, around 40 years ago. And maybe a little longer than that. But the idea of that opening line, there's one power in the universe, and we are all of us perfect manifestations of that power, is another way of saying the ancient maxim, as above, so below. That the creative power of the universe is present everywhere in the universe, including in us. And generally speaking, if I'm going to do an act of magic, I will start by observing that and reminding myself of it. So with that, I see we've come to the end of our half hour. Yazo says, I often do this when I'm spinning wool or embroidery. That's wonderful. I want to thank you all for joining me, and let us close with our prayers. We always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to help us to remember that it is always possible to change, to release, and to manifest according to our desires, that every moment is right on top of the chaos moment. And in the chaos moment, all patterns may be broken and changed. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love, knowing you are always with us, but from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence. I will see you tomorrow, and may you be blessed now